Henry VIII is remembered in history for being the most notorious and brutal monarch to have ever ruled over England. But the king would ruthlessly stop at nothing to get what he wanted, and he would quest greatly for a male heir and a son. This would lead to the Tudor monarch executing his second wife, Anne Boleyn. But Henry VIII would have a son who was born before his tribulations began with marriages. His marriage to begin with to his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, was believed to have been happy. But Catherine would give birth to a son, and history could have been incredibly different and less brutal if this son would have lived. Henry would not have had 6 wives, and he would have had the successor he greatly wanted. But what is the story of the painful death of Henry VIII's first son? In 1510, Catherine of Aragon was pregnant shortly after her marriage to King Henry VIII. Catherine was, of course, previously married to Henry's brother Arthur, but she did love her second husband, and things with her pregnancy were progressing well, and because of this she was sent for her lying in. This was a tradition in the Tudor period, where women for the final months of pregnancy would be locked in a room and would be attended on by women who would deliver the baby. Childbirth was, of course, also very dangerous at this time. But their early marriage was very fruitful and happy, and Catherine was loved by the people of England. But in the November of 1510, Henry VIII took part in a tournament, and he was the greatest athlete around at the time. But before Catherine retired from the eyes of the public, Henry VIII impressed her, and he held his grand event for her. He also organised musicians to serenade her and for dancers to entertain her. But before the Christmas of 1510, Catherine heard a mass with her court, and then hosted a lavish banquet for her household and the men and women of the court inside of her great chamber. The best wine and food was served, but then when she went and retired to her quarters, she would not be seen, as she was in confinement until the child was born. It was normal for this, and no men were allowed to enter the chambers, and Henry VIII would be banished from seeing his wife. Everything was done for Catherine, and she was looked after well, with beautiful tapestries placed upon the walls and beautiful fruitful paintings promoting positivity. The font was fetched from Canterbury Cathedral to be brought to the chamber in case the child needed a quick baptism, but on New Year's Day 1511 a child was born, and this was everything Henry VIII had wanted and dreamed of. The child was born a son, and Henry dreamed that one day this boy would succeed him as King of England and would become a man who would then carry the Tudor dynasty forward for the next centuries. He would hope that his son would have many other children and secure the Tudors on the throne for some time. But in the huge celebrations across London, bonfires were lit, and the Lord Mayor was ordered to serve free wine to everyone inside of the city to celebrate the birth of the prince. Along Tower Wharf, next to Tower of London, cannons fired a royal salute, and the midwife who delivered the baby was given a handsome financial reward. But Catherine of Aragon must have been very happy. She had done and performed her duty well, which was to provide the King of England with his male heir, and she watched as her ladies would wash and swaddle the baby, and this son was then placed inside of a large cradle. Catherine would sit up in bed, and in the presence chamber she received a number of guests, including her husband, Henry VIII, who was ecstatic and beaming with happiness. But it would be around 30 to 40 days later when Catherine returned to her normal duties as recovered, and the baby was named after its grandfather and father, with this prince being called Henry. But Henry Tudor Jr. would one day, it was hoped, become Henry IX when his father would not be around anymore. However, when Prince Henry was just 5 days old, he was taken to the church of the Observant Friars next to Richmond Palace, where he was born, and he was then baptised. Major courtiers and ambassadors saw the proceedings, and there was a lot of celebrations. The boy was then given the title the Duke of Cornwall, and his godparents were the Archbishop of Canterbury, William Warham, the Earl of Surrey, and the Earl and Countess of Devon. But there were celebrations all over Europe, as the King of France sent over many gifts, and European ambassadors, including those serving Spanish interests as Catherine was a princess from there, would visit the Queen and pass on their good wishes and congratulations. However, once the Queen left her rest, she would reunite with the King again, and the pair went to Westminster Palace. This left Prince Henry, the Duke of Cornwall, in the care of his nurses in the royal nursery, and he was regularly visited by his mother and father. Henry VIII would then organise another tournament in celebration of his son's birth, and this took place on the 12th of February, 1511. He would challenge men to beat him on the tilt yard, and then the huge displays of pageantry came. It was a huge celebration of court wealth and the king's happiness, and the queen attended with her ladies, and they sat in a gold and purple velvet-covered enclosure with fabric showing Henry and Catherine's initials embroiled together. A cart then came to the tilt yard, which was pulled by a lion covered in gold fabric, and then that evening there was another huge party and banquet. This was one of the happiest months of Henry's and Catherine's marriage, but things would come crashing down and celebrations would not last too long. The plans were for the first son, Prince Henry, the Duke of Cornwall, to also be named the Prince of Wales, as he was the heir to the throne. But 52 days after the young boy was born, horrific tragedy would hit the royal family. Whilst the young child was inside of the royal nursery at Richmond Palace, the boy died. It's not known what caused his death, but during the Tudor period it was very common for children to die, and it's believed half of those born would not make it into their 5th birthday. It's not known if the boy was ill or not, or he may have succumbed to what is today known as sudden infant death syndrome, but Queen Catherine was devastated, and Henry VIII was too, and he tried his best to comfort his wife. The prince's funeral was arranged, and representatives of the king and queen attended, and the funeral took place inside of Westminster Abbey. During the prince's funeral, the upsetting sight of the child's small coffin was taken from Richmond Palace down the River Thames, and it was placed on the royal barges, which were all draped in black. These took the coffin to Westminster, and all those involved in the procession also wore black. The boy's coffin was carried by 6 official mourners. These were knights who carried the coffin into the abbey. The route was lined by wax candles, and prayers were chanted as the coffin entered the abbey. Monks then took possession of the boy's remains, and following a short ceremony, the coffin of Prince Henry, the firstborn son of King Henry VIII, was buried inside of Westminster Abbey on the north side of the sanctuary area, close to the chapel of Edward the Confessor. The tragedy of the death of the prince, who was only 52 days old, is one that had a huge effect on English history. Catherine of Aragon and Henry VIII would try to have more children, but Catherine had many more tragedies regarding childbirth, which would then lead to the king turning his attention to other women, such as Anne Boleyn. She did give birth to his eldest child, the future Mary I, or Bloody Mary, but Henry VIII's turbulent love life would take the country down a path of execution, religious turmoil and brutality. The death of Prince Henry, the Duke of Cornwall, was one of the most tragic things of the life of Henry VIII, and the celebrations held following his birth showed how he was the one who would be the heir, and there was great hopes for him. But these hopes would be dashed inside of the royal nursery. Thank you for watching and support. Please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.